She had everything: money, status, and a future most people would kill for. But when Eliza boarded a plane to the Amazon alone, she wasn't chasing peace. She was running from a truth so painful, she'd rather erase herself than feel it again. They say ayahuasca opens the mind. But what if it opens a door that can't be closed? What if the person who comes back isn't the one who went in? Would you still drink it, if it meant never coming down? Eliza didn't tell anyone she was leaving, not her colleagues at the San Francisco-based tech firm she'd co-founded, not her on-again, off-again fiancé who still didn't know she'd seen the texts he thought were deleted, and certainly not her therapist, who had spent months trying to crack open the iron vault of her emotions. To the outside world, Eliza King was a rising titan in the world of digital security, a woman with sharp cheekbones, sharper instincts, and the kind of calculating calm that made venture capitalists trust her with millions. But beneath the curated image was something else, something crumbling. Something she couldn't outrun with 5 a.m. workouts, weekend retreats, or the $1,000 therapy sessions that always seemed to circle but never land. When the final betrayal came, a corporate coup led by someone she once mentored, a man who smiled in her face while carving out her legacy behind her back, something inside her broke, clean and irrevocable. She didn't rage. She didn't cry. She just closed her laptop, walked out of the boardroom, and never looked back. Her disappearance was deliberate, a vanishing act planned with the precision of a military operation. No digital breadcrumbs. No social media posts. No dramatic goodbyes. She booked a flight to Lima in cash, carrying nothing but a weatherproof backpack with water purification tablets, a journal, a flashlight, and a sealed envelope stuffed with Peruvian souls. No electronics. No phone. No identification beyond a passport that would soon go missing in a hotel drain. At the airport, she watched people through a blur, smiling families, chattering couples, tired businessmen. All tethered to something. She was not. On the flight, she stared out the window as clouds engulfed the wings, her mind flatlining into numbness. Not peace. Not fear. Just nothing. In Lima, she stayed one night in a nameless guesthouse that smelled of mold and lemon soap. She stared at the ceiling fan turning like a lazy metronome, thinking of her mother's voice the way one remembers a ghost in a house they're trying to sell. The next morning, she boarded a rickety puddle jumper to Iquitos, the largest city in the world unreachable by road. The jungle appeared like a living sea from above, green and endless, both inviting and monstrous. When the plane touched down on a strip carved out of the wilderness, the humidity hit her like a slap. A man with a pockmarked face and eyes that didn't blink met her at the exit. He said nothing, simply gestured to an ancient pickup that looked held together by prayer and rust. 4 hours they drove. The road narrowed. Paved turned to gravel. Gravel turned to dirt. Eventually, dirt surrendered to vines and branches so thick he stopped the truck altogether. He pointed into the forest with a single word: alley. There was no goodbye. No question of return. Eliza stepped into the jungle as if stepping off the edge of the world. Her boots sank into the soil with each step, the air growing heavier with every breath. She hiked for what felt like hours, branches scratching her skin, sweat pooling at her spine. Eventually, the trees parted. A clearing. In its center stood a single hut with a thatched roof, ancient yet maintained, as if time had decided to slow down here but not stop. A woman emerged from the shadows, young, barefoot, dressed in white linen with a stare that seemed to pass through Eliza's skin. Her name was Yora. She said it once and never repeated it. Her English was perfect, her tone detached yet warm, like a librarian of forgotten rituals. She offered no handshake, just a bowl of water and a command to sit. Yora explained the rules with a gravity that made Eliza's skin prickle. The ceremony would begin tomorrow at sunset. Tonight, she must eat nothing, speak little, and bathe in the nearby river to wash away the world. Eliza nodded, too exhausted to argue. She undressed by the water, the jungle watching her with a silence that felt alive. The cold current shocked her system, but she welcomed it. When she returned to the hut, Yora had vanished. The night was thick with unfamiliar sounds, chirps, rustles, low groans of distant animals. Eliza lay on a straw mat, staring at a ceiling made of palm fronds, the stars poking through like eyes in a mask. By morning, The tension in the air had hardened into something metallic. Yora returned and began preparing the brew with a series of chants, grinding herbs with a stone pestle, laying out strange bones and crushed flowers in patterns that made Eliza feel like she was trespassing on something ancient. She watched in silence, hunger dulling her mind. When she asked if anyone else would be joining, Yora shook her head. "The spirit doesn't like an audience," she whispered. "It comes only for those who come alone." That afternoon, she handed Eliza a carved wooden bowl filled with thick, black liquid that smelled like fermented earth and rotting fruit. "When the sun touches the horizon, drink. Then lie down. Do not open your eyes until it calls you." And just like that, she was gone. Eliza sat in the doorway of the hut, watching the sun descend with the slow cruelty of a countdown clock. Part of her wanted to run. Part of her hoped she would die. But most of her just wanted to know if there was anything left to feel. When the sun kissed the horizon, she drank. The taste was worse than the smell, bitter, rancid, ancient. She gagged but kept it down. She lay back on the mat, eyes clenched shut, hands gripping the dirt floor. The world shifted. Not all at once, but in spirals. Sounds stretched and bent. Her heartbeat grew loud, then quiet, then vanished. The jungle exhaled, and something answered from deep within her mind. She tried to scream, but her mouth forgot how. Eliza King had gone into the Amazon alone. And something else had begun to wake. The first thing Eliza remembered was the sound, the way it didn't come from the jungle but from inside her own ribcage, like a cello string being dragged slowly out of tune. She tried to move, but her limbs were liquid. Her breath came in shallow ripples, like she was floating face up in a lake of invisible molasses. Then the colors arrived, not on the trees or the hut, but behind her eyelids, alive and undulating. They formed shapes she didn't recognize but somehow understood. Spirals. Eyes. Mouths. Teeth. 1,000 voices speaking in a language that didn't need words. Panic surged, but it was swallowed by something deeper, an ancient calm that seemed to whisper, "This is the part where you let go." And so, Eliza did. She released the panic like a balloon in the sky and watched it drift out of reach. Then the memories came, uninvited and merciless. Her childhood, the smell of bourbon on her father's breath, the sound of the belt sliding out of its loop, her mother's distant eyes. Her teenage self, bleeding on the bathroom tile after swallowing too many pills, thinking the silence would finally come. Her first love, her first betrayal, the first time she realized success was just armor worn over hollow core. They didn't come as images. They came as weight. As pressure. As a choking vine that wrapped around her lungs and demanded to be felt. In the grip of the medicine, time shattered. She saw herself from above, then from inside, then from moments that hadn't yet happened. She was a child again, crying into the floorboards. She was a woman in a white conference room, smiling while a coworker called her intimidating. She was an old woman dying alone in a sterile bed. And she was something else entirely, something not human, not bound by flesh or story. A watcher. A node. A vessel. She tried to scream but had no mouth. Tried to cry but had no face. The forest spoke through her skin, humming in tones she felt in her bones. It was then, in that stretched-out liminal space between memory and surrender, that she met the version of herself she'd buried long ago. The wild girl with scraped knees and feral eyes who once believed the world was magic before it taught her to be quiet. That girl stared at her with pity and rage, holding a shard of glass in one hand and a dead bird in the other. "Why did you let them change us?" she asked. Eliza couldn't answer. She only wept. She tried to find the ground but found sky instead. Tried to open her eyes but saw nothing but the jungle breathing. The trees pulsed. The air thickened. Every insect call was a warning, every gust of wind a verdict. The jungle wasn't just around her, it was in her. It spoke in her blood, throbbed in her ears. And then came the laughter. Not cruel, but ancient. Feminine. It bubbled up from the roots of the earth, wrapped around her like vines. It whispered her name in 1,000 accents. Eliza. Eliza. Eliza, over and over, until it became a lullaby. She saw women, faceless, nude, powerful, dancing in circles made of ash. One reached out and touched her chest, and Eliza convulsed. Her mouth opened, and she vomited into the dark. Not just the brew, but everything she'd held for decades. Guilt, anger, shame. It poured out in colors. And then, for a brief moment, came silence. Not emptiness. Stillness. The kind that only arrives after a storm. But it didn't last. The colors returned, sharper now, more urgent. She felt herself being pulled deeper. Past memory. Past self. Into something else. She saw a jungle within the jungle, a dimension layered beneath bark and vine, where serpents of light slithered between trees made of breath. A figure stood at the center, a woman cloaked in darkness, her face painted with tears made of ink. "You came to forget," the woman said. "But forgetting is death. And you are not ready to die." Eliza tried to step forward, but her feet wouldn't move. Roots had grown from her ankles, anchoring her to the soil. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Truth," the woman replied. "Not the one you tell others. The one you bury under achievement." And then she was gone. In her place, a mirror rose from the ground, fogged and pulsing. Eliza looked into it, and saw not her face, but everyone she had ever hurt. Her assistant crying in the elevator after Eliza's cruelty. Her fiancé staring at her in silence when she confessed she never wanted children. The intern she fired to protect a senior partner's ego. Every cut she ever delivered in the name of efficiency. The medicine didn't just show the wound she carried, it showed the one she made. The spiral deepened. At some point, she felt her body rise from the mat. She was standing, though her eyes were still shut, and walking barefoot into the jungle. The trees parted for her. The stars blinked messages she couldn't decipher. Somewhere, far away, something howled. She knelt at the base of a tree that bled sap the color of blood and pressed her forehead to its bark. It whispered secrets in return. She laughed. Then cried. Then laughed again. The vines caressed her arms like lovers. The earth breathed with her lungs. And for the first time in years, Eliza felt alive. Not safe. Not sane. But awake. When the moon passed overhead, she whispered to it, "I don't want to go back." And the jungle answered, "Then stay." Hours or days passed. She didn't know. She drank from the river with cupped hands. She sang with the birds. She curled up in the moss and dreamt of oceans she'd never seen. Her body no longer ached. Her mind no longer buzzed. She was a child again. Or an animal. Or something in between. She didn't think of San Francisco, or emails, or betrayal. She only thought of the next breath, the next step, the next heartbeat. And then, nothing. No fear. No hunger. Just jungle. Just Eliza. Just the quiet. When Eliza awoke, the world had shifted in ways too subtle to name and too immense to ignore. At first, she wasn't sure she was awake at all. The sky above her looked peeled back, stars too close, like they were dangling from threads instead of burning billions of miles away. Her fingers clawed at the dirt beneath her mat, but it felt wrong, too warm, too soft, like flesh rather than soil. The hut around her was quiet, eerily so, and something in the silence struck her as unnatural. She tried to sit up, but her muscles screamed with the ache of unfamiliar strain. That's when she realized she wasn't wearing the same clothes anymore. Her shirt, once soaked with sweat and medicine, was now dry and torn at the collar. Her leggings were caked in dried mud she couldn't remember walking through. She looked down at her hands, scratched, bleeding, nails broken. Had she gone somewhere during the night? Had she left the hut? The sun was high when she stumbled outside, casting sharp shadows that danced with every twitch of the canopy. The hut stood alone, just as it had before, but something about it was emptier. Too still, too clean. Her belongings were gone, her backpack, her flashlight, even her journal. She searched the entire structure 3 times, heart pounding with a rising panic that had nothing to do with the medicine and everything to do with something being terribly off. And then came the realization that struck her with a kind of coldness no heat could dispel. Yora was gone. Not asleep, not nearby. Gone. The mortar and pestle were still there, still stained with dried herbs. The ashes on the floor, once arranged in sacred geometry, had been smeared as if swept away by a wind that only moved inside. The vines that framed the entrance now twisted inward, coiling like they were leaning to listen. Eliza called her name once. Then again. Then screamed it, her voice cracking as it echoed across the clearing and was swallowed whole by the dense jungle. No answer. No rustle of movement. No trail of footprints. It was as if Yora had never existed at all. The idea that she had hallucinated everything clawed at her brain, but the scratches on her skin and the deep ache in her legs told a different story. She wasn't just alone, she was stranded. She had no idea how far the road was, no way of knowing which direction it lay, and her water had vanished with the rest of her gear. For a long time, she sat beneath the twisted tree beside the hut and stared into the green. She thought of people back home, how they would react when she didn't return, how long it would take before anyone realized she was missing. A month. A year. Never. She'd told no one. Left no trail. In many ways, she realized, she had made it easy to disappear. But the jungle did not wait for grief. As the hours crawled by, its presence grew heavier. The once comforting rustle of leaves began to sound like whispers. The bird calls took on a rhythm, a pattern that teased the edge of language. Her stomach churned with hunger, her mouth dry, but she dared not drink from the same stream again, not after what had happened. She began to walk, hoping movement would silence the panic screaming in her skull. The forest was beautiful, yes, but in the way a predator is beautiful right before it kills. The trees seemed to lean closer the deeper she walked, roots twisting in her path like fingers meant to trip her. And every now and then, out of the corner of her eye, she thought she saw someone watching. Just for a moment. A silhouette. A flash of white linen. But when she turned, there was only emptiness. She found a narrow trail, half overgrown, but distinctly man-made. Relief warred with suspicion. Had Yora used this trail? Was it a trap? Eliza followed it anyway, more afraid of staying still than whatever lay ahead. The path wound through thick clusters of palm and under a canopy that filtered the sunlight into fractured gold. Every step echoed in her head, louder than it should have been. After what felt like hours, she reached another clearing. This one was different. There was no hut, no symbols. Just a circle of stones and something lying at its center. Her stomach twisted when she realized it was a small bundle of cloth, her shirt, folded neatly, placed like an offering. On top of it, a carving. It looked like a totem, etched from dark wood into the shape of a woman with a gaping mouth and eyes that bled down her face. Eliza backed away slowly, unsure if she was looking at a warning or a welcome. Either way, it was meant for her. That night, she made a fire. The jungle didn't want it. The branches snapped too loudly. The smoke twisted into faces. But the fire gave her a sense of border, a line between her and whatever else lurked beyond the trees. She didn't sleep, only watched the shadows, heart pounding every time a twig snapped. Something was out there. She knew it the way prey knows a hunter. And then, just before dawn, she heard it, a soft laugh, high and broken, like a woman trying to cry and failing. It came from the dark, from everywhere and nowhere. Eliza didn't run. She knew she'd be running in circles. She just sat by the fire, arms around her knees, and whispered to herself, "Wake up. Wake up. Wake up." The morning brought no peace. The trail was gone. The clearing behind her looked different, warped. She began to question if she had ever really walked anywhere at all or if the forest was simply changing around her. She found no more paths, no sign of rescue. Instead, she began to see markings on trees, carvings, fresh ones, in shapes that felt familiar. Spirals. Triangles. A circle with a line through it. The same symbols Yora had drawn on the floor of the hut. They weren't random. They followed her, guiding her, or watching her. On the third day, her hunger overpowered her fear. She ate fruit she couldn't name. Bitter. Juicy. Something inside it pulsed. She drank from a leaf, and it tasted like mint and fire. Her body rebelled, then accepted. Her mind bent. She laughed again, for no reason, then wept until her nose bled. And through it all, the jungle hummed. At sunset, she returned to the first clearing, as if pulled there. The hut was gone. Only the ashes remained, scattered in a perfect spiral. In the center, a single object sat on the ground. Her journal. Open to a page she hadn't written. The words etched in charcoal read, "She was never alone. She was always watched." And beneath that, a symbol, a third eye, open and crying. Eliza dropped to her knees, unable to breathe. The wind picked up. The trees bent. And something deep in the jungle whispered her name again, not with cruelty, but with ownership. The whispering began as a flutter, like wind moving through hollow bamboo, but it soon sharpened into language. Not external. Not quite internal either. It lived in the crevices between thought and silence, slipping past logic with the slithering grace of a predator. Eliza didn't hear it with her ears. She felt it, like a memory that wasn't hers being repeated with the weight of ancient truth. "You came here to forget," it said again, "but you never learned how to remember." At first, she thought it was just a hallucination, a leftover echo of the ayahuasca dragging its tail through her mind. But the voice persisted through waking, through sleep, through the haze that now passed for her reality. It spoke in riddles, in warnings, sometimes in laughter that turned into weeping and back again. It didn't belong to Yora. It didn't belong to herself. It belonged to the jungle, or something deeper. She tried to resist it. She screamed over it, hummed loud songs, pressed her hands over her ears until her skull throbbed, but it didn't matter. The voice was not in the air. It was in the blood. And it didn't just speak. It remembered. It began to show her things, not in dreams, but in flashes so vivid they hijacked her vision. A baby bird falling from a nest and being devoured by ants. A shaman in another century standing still as snakes slithered over his shoulders. A woman with Eliza's face being dragged into the river by pale hands. Eliza began to lose time. She would blink and find herself barefoot on a ridge, arms scratched and lips torn. She carved strange patterns into bark without knowing how she got the knife. One night, she woke to find her arms painted in red clay symbols and ash, her own fingers stained. She was becoming something she didn't understand, something the voice insisted was her true self. It asked her questions she didn't want to answer. Why didn't you scream when he hit you? Why did you let the boy drown in silence while you watched? Why did you run when your friend cried in that bathroom stall? Each memory hit like a hammer, tearing open parts of her she thought long buried. The voice wasn't just torturing her. It was excavating her, stripping her down to a version of Eliza that had never been seen, not by her therapist, not by her lovers, not even by herself. She stopped trying to categorize time. The jungle was her clock now, the sun an indifferent witness. She felt herself loosening, unraveling. Sometimes she forgot her name. Other times she remembered names that weren't hers, Isabella, Neela, Asha, each accompanied by glimpses of lives she hadn't lived but felt aching familiarity with. The voice called these threads, and Eliza began to suspect she wasn't just breaking down. She was being rewoven. She found herself speaking back to the voice. Not out loud, not always in words, but with emotion, with memory, with surrender. When it asked why she built walls around her mind, she showed it the night her father smashed her mother's face into a mirror while she hid under the bed. When it asked why she chased power, she showed it the boardroom where a man twice her age called her little girl in front of shareholders and smiled as the room laughed. When it asked why she came to the jungle, she answered with silence so loud it cracked through the trees like thunder. And still, the voice pushed. "You came to meet me," it said one night, gently now, like a lover pressing a hand to her chest. "You just didn't know my name yet." That was the night she stopped sleeping. The jungle didn't rest, and neither could she. She began to feel watched, not just by the animals or the wind, but by something just beyond the trees. Something too still. Too quiet. The voice would pause when it came close. One night, she saw eyes. Not glowing. Not animal. Just eyes, deep in the brush, reflecting nothing. She stepped toward them, and they vanished. The next morning, she found footprints that matched her own but walked in reverse. She followed them for an hour before they disappeared into the roots of a tree shaped like a claw. The message was clear: she was not alone. Not in mind, not in body, not even in self. Her grip on the old world grew weaker. She forgot what day it was. Forgot what her apartment looked like. forgot the sound of her mother's voice. But she remembered things that didn't belong to her: a man being buried alive in ritual, a girl dancing with bones in her hands, a woman eating flower petals while whispering prayers in a language lost to time. These visions blurred the line between hallucination and inheritance. She wasn't tripping anymore. She was remembering. Remembering not what she had lived, but what had lived through her. The voice told her stories of women who had come to the jungle before her. All alone. All seeking something they couldn't name. Some never left, it whispered. Some became something else. And one became me. That was the first time she felt true fear, not of dying, but of merging. The idea that she might dissolve into something collective, something eternal and unspeakable, made her want to claw her way back to a world that no longer fit her. She looked at her own hands and saw veins crawling with patterns like vines. Her reflection in a pool of water didn't match her face. Her eyes were darker. Her expression, ancient. "I'm not ready," she whispered. The voice only laughed. "You came too far to go back." That night, she found the hut again. It had returned, but changed. Smaller. Covered in roots. Inside, a bowl waited for her, filled with the same dark liquid. She didn't remember preparing it. Didn't remember bringing it back. But she knew what it was. And this time, she drank without hesitation. The voice sang then. Not in language, but in tone. Long, deep notes that vibrated her bones. The forest swayed in rhythm. She fell into herself. Not asleep. Not awake. In between. And there, in the endless dark, she met it. A presence made of shadow and sound, a woman with no face and many mouths. "You are the question," it said. "I am the answer. Let me in." And as her body arched on the dirt floor, eyes wide with tears and terror, Eliza did not scream. She opened her mouth. And welcomed it. She awoke to silence, but not the comforting kind. The air around her was taut, expectant, as though the jungle itself had paused to listen. Eliza's eyes blinked open to find herself lying outside the hut again, though she didn't remember walking there. The bowl she had emptied was gone, and her arms were streaked with fresh markings, not drawn but seemingly etched beneath her skin. Her limbs trembled as she sat up, as if her body had carried out rituals in the night her mind wasn't allowed to witness. For the first time since her arrival, the world didn't feel surreal. It felt hyperreal, like the veil had thinned so completely that now, even closing her eyes would not bring her back. The ground beneath her pulsed softly. The sky swirled without movement. And when she turned to glance at the forest line, she saw it. Not a shadow, not a trick of the light, but a woman, tall, motionless, watching her from beyond the trees. Eliza called out, but the figure didn't answer. Didn't move. Then, slowly, it vanished into the green like it had never been. Shaken, Eliza stood and approached the spot where the figure had stood. The earth bore no prints. No trail broken. Just undisturbed undergrowth that should have snapped beneath any weight. She turned back toward the hut, and saw it wasn't there. Where the structure had stood, there was now only a scorched ring of earth, its perimeter scattered with bones. Not animal bones. Human. Eliza backed away, bile rising in her throat, but it was the object in the center that truly made her knees buckle. A camera. Her camera. The one she'd brought in her bag, the bag that had disappeared days ago. She staggered forward and picked it up. The casing was scratched but intact. Somehow, the battery still held charge. Her hands trembled as she turned it on, fearing what might be inside. There were only a few files. All with timestamps from the last 3 nights. Videos. She hesitated, then pressed play. The screen lit up with a shaky image of the jungle at night, illuminated by the camera's built-in light. Heavy breathing. Eliza's voice, chanting something unintelligible. The frame tilted wildly as the camera swung around, catching her face in a quick glimpse, eyes wide, mouth slack, ash smeared down her cheeks. She was naked, body painted with the same strange symbols now on her arms. Then the video cut. The next clip showed her digging, fingers clawing at the dirt like an animal, whispering Yora's name again and again. "Where are you? You said I'd be reborn, why did you leave me?" Her voice cracked into a sob. The camera dropped, landing sideways. In the distance, something moved. Slowly, elegantly, a blur of white just at the edge of the frame. And then, abruptly, the footage ended. She played the final video. At first, it was only darkness. Then, the soft hum of chanting. Her voice again, but deeper now, resonant, unfamiliar. She has come. She remembers. She chooses. A low chorus echoed her words. Not hers. Not just one. Many. Dozens of voices layered together, surrounding her. The camera shook, and for a moment, it captured a ring of figures. Women dressed in shreds of fabric and feathers, their faces obscured by ash and bone. One turned toward the camera and raised a hand. Her eyes were white. Not rolled back, white. Blank, like polished stone. She said something that made Eliza's blood freeze. She is the vessel. She will carry us. Then the video went black. Eliza dropped the camera. Her pulse thundered in her ears. None of it made sense, and yet, deep in her gut, she knew it had all happened. She wasn't hallucinating. She wasn't dreaming. And whatever she had become part of, it was not a metaphor. It was not psychological. It was real. She was not the first. She would not be the last. And as the jungle grew louder again with the hum of insects and bird calls, she heard something beneath it all, the same low chanting from the video, far away, buried under the foliage, moving slowly closer. In the hours that followed, the jungle began to change its rhythm. The vines seemed more mobile, curling like fingers as she passed. The wind brought scents she couldn't name but recognized. The birds did not flee her presence anymore, they followed. A pair of parrots landed near her and watched in eerie silence as she walked by. Her body no longer felt like it belonged only to her. Her movements were more fluid, her posture taller, her senses sharper. She caught herself staring at her reflection in a pool and not recognizing her own eyes. They were hers, but deeper, wider. Something else blinked behind them. She returned to the site of the scorched hut. The bones were gone. The earth was untouched. As if the jungle had swallowed the evidence whole. She collapsed to her knees in the center and screamed, not out of fear, but defiance. "What do you want from me?" The response came not in voice, but in vision. Her mind was filled with a flash of images, a city in flames, children singing to a skeleton, her own face aging in reverse, then splitting open to reveal roots beneath the skin. A message pressed into her skull like a brand. "You are the door. And now it opens." That night, she slept curled in a bed of moss. Dreams came hard and fast. In one, she walked through a ruined cathedral made of vines, hundreds of women sitting silently in prayer to an altar of light. In another, she gave birth to a child made of water, and it dissolved in her hands while whispering her name. She woke to find her body drenched in sweat, her fingertips glowing faintly with green light. The whispers had not returned. The chanting had stopped. But she knew that didn't mean they were gone. Only that they were now inside. In the days that followed, Eliza stopped counting time. She didn't need to. The jungle told her what it wanted. She moved with purpose she didn't understand but no longer questioned. She found fruit that healed her sores, leaves that eased her thirst. At night, she spoke to the stars, and they blinked back in patterns that formed glyphs she once saw in dreams. A ritual was beginning. She was the center. The purpose. Not prey, not predator, but conduit. Her body a bridge. Her mind an altar. And somewhere deep inside, the part of her that once belonged to the city, the life, the ambition, it flickered. Not out of fear. But awe. She had gone seeking oblivion. What she found was far more terrifying. She had been chosen. Months later, the villagers began to speak of her in hushed tones, their words half superstition, half witness. At first, it was only fragments, strange sightings near the river, footprints where no one had walked, chants carried on the wind in a language none could place. Then came the accounts from hunters who had ventured too far, a woman wandering alone, barefoot, dressed in vines and bark, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. She did not run. She did not speak. She only watched, then turned and vanished between the trees, leaving behind a silence so thick it choked the air. Most dismissed the stories as jungle madness. the way one shrugs off myths to protect the mind from the places the body can't survive. But some, especially the old ones, looked toward the forest with knowing fear, whispering names no one dared translate. One of them swore he had seen her kneeling beside a jaguar at dawn, whispering into its ear as it closed its eyes and bowed. He said the animal kissed her hand before disappearing, and he never hunted again. Eliza King never boarded a return flight. Her name eventually slipped into the digital backlog of missing persons, her photo circulating in outdated newsfeeds and message boards with dwindling hope. Her company replaced her. Her apartment was rented to someone else. Friends speculated, suicide, kidnapping, rogue spiritual retreat gone wrong. Her fiancé, long since estranged, made a few public pleas before moving on. But no one ever found a body. No one traced a single breadcrumb beyond Iquitos. It was as if the jungle had swallowed her whole and decided to keep her. And in a way, it had. But Eliza wasn't dead. Not in the way they thought. She lived now at the edge of something the world didn't have words for. Not madness. Not enlightenment. Something older. Something elemental. She no longer marked the days. Her mind had absorbed the pulse of the forest, syncing with its breath, its tides, its rhythms. She could sense rain before clouds formed. Could hear insects arguing miles away. Could feel the stories trapped in tree bark. Her reflection in water no longer startled her. It belonged to something both human and not. Her eyes were deeper now, framed in dark streaks of mineral dye. Her voice, when she spoke, echoed strangely, like the trees leaned in to catch it. She remembered her old life, but only as a ghost might, distant, grainy, more sensation than chronology. The pain, the ambition, the betrayal, they were seeds in the soil of who she had become. Necessary to sprout, but irrelevant to bloom. The jungle no longer treated her like an intruder. It yielded to her, parted for her, whispered to her in rustling leaves and shifting shadows. She discovered ruins half buried by time, stone altars worn smooth by centuries of forgotten ritual. Sometimes she danced beneath the moon, surrounded by creatures that no longer feared her. Monkeys who brought her fruit, snakes who curled around her legs without threat, birds who sang in unison when she cried. She was no longer lonely. Not because she found others, but because she became many. The voice that once haunted her was now part of her. It guided her, not as a command but as a current, flowing through her veins with purpose. She did not question it anymore. She understood now that questioning was a disease of cities. But some nights, when the fog rolled in heavy and the trees stood like sentinels, Eliza would sit by the river and look toward the horizon, toward the distant hum of a world that once knew her name. She would wonder, not with longing, but with curiosity, if anyone had truly seen her, even before she vanished. If anyone had noticed that she was unraveling long before she boarded the plane. The truth was, she hadn't come to the jungle to find herself. She had come to bury the self they'd built for her. And somewhere between the hallucinations and the howling, she had succeeded. That self was gone. It had died in the hut. What remained was something born of the dirt, the pain, the revelation. Something not meant to return. Eliza began to mark her skin with stories, symbols she carved gently into her thighs and arms, each one a memory she chose to carry forward. Not wounds, but scriptures. One for the girl she once was, hiding under a bed from her father's rage. One for the woman who lost her company to betrayal and didn't fight back. One for Yora, whose name she never spoke aloud again. And one, darkest of all, for the part of her that had whispered stay the moment the brew touched her lips. She had listened. And it had cost her everything. But she had no regrets. The jungle had stripped her of illusion, of vanity, of logic. It had fed her truth so bitter and raw they scraped her soul clean. And now she walked with that clarity, barefoot on soil that remembered every step. Sometimes she felt others. Not near, but close enough to sense, souls brushing the edges of the forest, tourists or seekers or fools. She never approached them. But she watched. To see if they would listen. To see if they too would drink. She knew now what the jungle wanted. It did not crave bodies. It craved conduits. Portals. Story keepers. And she had become one. The forest was not just alive, it was sentient. And it remembered every offering. Eliza was no longer lost. She had merely returned to the place where all things begin again. The last known sighting came from a biologist documenting fungi near the Mater de Dios basin. He wrote, in his journal, that he had encountered a woman speaking in song, her skin covered in glyphs, her eyes ringed with green. He offered her water. She declined. He asked her name. She tilted her head and said, "I've had many." Then she smiled and asked him a question he could not shake. "Would you recognize yourself if the forest showed you?" The next morning, she was gone. But the footprint she left behind, bare, deep, and perfectly symmetrical, glowed faintly in the early sun.